We do have a live interview to get to here in a second. Our investigative guy, Nate Morabito, is here with an amazing story. We're going to talk a little bit about the process, Nate, so I'll bring you in. I don't want to give the story away because it will be a big one at 6, right? But a very interesting story. It kind of relates to a gun, right, that we're looking into. Talk about really the case as you found it and really where you are in trying to flesh out interviews, sources, that type of thing, information.
Yeah, Colin. So, probably a couple months ago, I noticed some reporting from one of our colleagues at our station in Seattle, King TV. One of my friends is an investigative reporter there, and I noticed there in the state of Washington, the state's training academy banned a specific type of gun used by many police officers, many civilians, regular people. And the reason they did that is because of a growing number of reports that essentially said this gun, when holstered, still went off and injured people in other states. And right. I'm talking about the Sig Sauer P320, which is a very popular gun. It's a spring-loaded, they call it a striker-fired gun. And essentially, in the state of Washington, they said, we've done an independent investigation. We see other places across the country where we believe this gun is going off without people touching the trigger, and we don't think it's safe for our recruits to use it. So initially, that says to me, wow, is there a safety issue here that's going to impact the people here in the Carolinas? That's my concern, right? When I hear something like that. So my normal kind of due diligence here is, now that I know about this, I really need to ask some questions about it. I need to do some research to see, is this a problem? And is anyone in North Carolina or South Carolina affected? So I started doing my research to reach out to several different people, and ultimately came across a recent lawsuit that involved 3 people from North Carolina. They're all officers. 2 of them were working reportedly at the time this happened. And I want to show video of one of these incidents. This is from High Point a couple of years ago, and it's essentially a surveillance video from a parking lot there where they're showing out in the distance a man with some bags over his shoulder trying to get into a minivan. And if you can go ahead and show us that, Jeff. I want to kind of talk through it for a second. You'll see kind of I believe it's a maroon minivan, or maybe it's a silver minivan.
Yeah.
Kind of in the middle of your screen there.
Okay.
Right? So this is a police officer in High Point, North Carolina. This is an officer, I'm told, who is a combat veteran who was part of the SWAT team. And you see all these people start running to that car. He and some other people have filed lawsuits that said, essentially, his gun, which was holstered, the Sig Sauer P320, went off without him ever touching the trigger, and he suffered injuries as a result of that. He's since retired. So we knew that there was this one case here in North Carolina, and it turns out there's a couple. There's a few of these similar cases involving officers. So I reach out to an attorney who represents this man. This man's name is Vincent Panico, the High Point police officer. Okay. And his attorney's name is Robert Zimmerman, and I'm trying to understand, what is the real story? What is your all's allegations about this specific type of gun? Can we listen to him real quick, Joe?
Yeah. The issue is that Sig Sauer made a gun unlike any other gun manufacturer had ever made a gun before. This is a striker-fired gun. It is pre-cocked, it is pre-loaded, and it only takes very slight trigger movement for the gun to actuate and fire. So this type of gun, traditionally with other gun manufacturers, has at least one external safety, either a thumb safety or a trigger safety. The P320 has none of those safeties on the vast majority of the P320s that are offered to the public and to law enforcement.
An interesting comment there, Nate. So you were able to contact this attorney. Obviously, he gave his side of it, and you found other cases like this. So did you reach out to those other attorneys and compile some of those stories?
Well, there's some videos that attorneys throughout the country have spent years collecting. Okay. And we were able to get access to some of those videos from across the country where this gun reportedly goes off, and you
Right.
see these people's reactions. In one case, you see an officer on the ground with blood coming out of him, and he's saying essentially that my gun was in the holster and it went off.
Mm-hmm.
And you see several of these cases. And why does it really ultimately matter?
Right.
We're talking about High Point. Well, the North Carolina State Highway Patrol uses this gun. That's ultimately what we were able to find out.
Yeah, more than 1,500.
Yeah, troopers. More
Yeah.
than 1,500 of them have this gun. And these are troopers. What's a trooper's number one job?
Right. Keep people safe, right?
Keep people safe,
Yeah.
patrol the roads,
Right.
pull people over
Yeah.
if you're speeding. And they're getting in and out of their cars a lot.
Exactly.
They're walking up to other people's cars.
Right.
And we want to make sure that there's a public discussion about the merits of the allegations against this
Yeah.
gun, but also the merits of the company who will defend the use of this gun. So we wanted to know, well, is the Highway Patrol concerned about this gun?
Mhm.
You know, and so that's part of our reporting you're going to see tonight at 6.
Yeah.
But I really want to point out, throughout all this gathering too, something that we pride ourselves on here is we give these people on the other side of a story plenty of time
Right.
to tell their side of the story. In this case, I gave a significant amount of time, a long runway to Sig Sauer to respond for a Zoom interview, to provide evidence that would dispute some of the claims against them. The company
Mm-hmm.
never responded to me. But I can tell you a couple things. Number one, when that State of Washington task force was reviewing whether or not to ban this gun in its training academy,
Yeah.
our representatives of Sig Sauer went and spoke before a task force and said, this gun cannot go off like this. It cannot go off. It's engineered in a certain way so that it cannot go off if you don't touch the trigger, right?
Yeah.
Number one. They argue that there's no evidence, that none of these people that have filed suit have any evidence to show that this is exactly what's happening. They argue many of the cases they were negligently in the holster or handled potentially. And they just say they believe that this is a situation where there's been many lawsuits, and they believe they're trying to get paid, essentially, these plaintiffs.
Okay.
I will tell you, there is a widow in Pennsylvania of a man who sued this company, and I believe the lawsuit was filed in December. Her husband, she argues, was killed by this gun without touching the actual trigger. And so I think the most important job we have is to gather the facts,
Right.
present both sides, present the evidence in totality in a very fair way. I mean, this has taken me a while to work through this story,
Yeah.
so that we can present it in a way that people can say, okay, I can hear and see all the sides,
Right.
and I can make a decision for myself. Do I need to reach out to the Highway Patrol, or do I feel comfortable with them using it? Either way, at least they'll have that information now. That's the goal.
Exactly. So I got to ask because, I get sent stuff all the time. We have news tips, and we really love when our viewers take notice, right? And take just an importance in maybe telling us about something we didn't know, which I assume this is how a lot of these stories sometimes go. So my question to you is, and I know you've spoken at length about this, you've even gone to certain seminars to teach others about it as well. How do you disseminate between certain requests and questions and stories? Because this, as you said, right, it started out with Washington State. Didn't have any type of connection to North Carolina until you saw, right, that more than 1,500 officers on the Highway Patrol use this. So how do you get started there in knowing that this is an actual claim, right? I mean, it was pretty quickly that you knew something was up here in some sense, at least on one side, right? So take me through that process. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so you want to figure out, number one, are there lawsuits? Are there formal complaints against this kind of weapon, in this case, right? Is there video? What kind of evidence is out there, right? And when you start seeing video from multiple places, when you see people, our friend up there in Seattle interviewed a woman from Virginia who said the same thing happened to her. She's not involved in our story, but you hear what she says, you hear what these attorneys say. These plaintiffs, as they're called, are putting it all out there in black and white in lawsuits.
Yeah.
And you're realizing that this gun has come under fire. And there was a new lawsuit filed in March or something like that against this company that involves the Vincent Panico officer and several others.
High Point, right?
In High Point,
okay.
yes. And, these attorneys will say we represent combined hundreds of people.
Yeah.
That, most of them law enforcement that have experienced this. And so it's a fair question then to ask. Systemically, is this the best gun to be using right now? Does the gun need to be recalled and fixed? Is the gun safe? Any of those questions are fair questions to ask here.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what we're trying to figure out. And I'll tell you too, Colin, like when I get a tip, sometimes they're consumer-driven tips, and I generally will say, I always say the first step for anybody that has a consumer issue should be their state attorney general, who can often advocate for them, right? But if there's a systemic consumer issue, meaning it's an institutional problem,
Right.
that's when I will say, well, this really is something that I think we can have an impact on.
Yeah.
And I think we can tell the public about. There's a case that I'm looking at right now involving a builder of homes that have gone unfinished, right? And it's impacting dozens of homes in multiple neighborhoods, and people are living near homes that were never finished. And you wonder, well, how does it get to that point? How can you be a homeowner that's doing everything right, and be surrounded by 5 or 6 homes that never get finished, right? That should not be
it's
the
not
way
normal.
the system works.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out when we do these stories. What can we do to improve the system so that we can really understand that we're getting the most benefit out of it?
You always find a way, though. I have to ask this as well, because I even found it in my own reporting here in Charlotte, and obviously you've been here much longer than I have. People don't always, right? They're a little bit worried that maybe we'll catch them out. Maybe we'll ask some questions that they didn't think of, something like that, right? But in a lot of times, it is our job to find the facts, no matter what side of the aisle, and bring them, like you said, both sides. Do you ever run into a wall, right? Or maybe a response that you didn't expect? And how do you find your way out of that to really reposition the story and refocus it?
Well, for me, it's all about accountability, number one. At least in the Sig Sauer case, there is the legal system now, right? The company's not in Charlotte.
Yeah.
I can't show up at their door and interview them about it. I gave them a chance to respond. They put a statement.
In fact, they're not a United States-based company, I don't think, right?
I'm not sure where they're located.
I think they're German-based, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Sig Sauer, yeah.
Okay, well, I gave them a chance to talk. They didn't respond. They had a release they put on their website in March. We're including that in our reporting, right?
Okay.
But you have an issue here in Charlotte involving people in Charlotte. And
Swiss company. My fault.
Okay, thanks for the correction there.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. We were doing some stories, speaking of guns, about people who battled addiction, who were getting wrongly denied concealed carry permits by the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. This was towards the end of the year. There's some legislation pending right now in the state.
That's right.
Based on our reporting. And in that case, the sheriff just wasn't going to talk to us, right? And so we're at a point where we've documented a lot of cases where a judge has said this was wrongly denied. We have an elected official, and I essentially said, look, I'm going to give you some time, but you can expect to see us at some point. We're going to ask you these questions on camera. And it's never a threat. It's the reality. I'm going to follow through on it, right? And we did, and we got him, and we talked to him for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. He was fairly open in our conversation. But there's the accountability. Now it's me asking him questions, right, that the public deserves answers to. And I think that that's a path that we take often. I find, because of our approach being fair, not rushing stuff on TV, people will tend to sit down and talk with us. But when they don't, I will tell them, if it's a story that we think that there needs to be accountability in, you can expect us at the city council meeting. We will be there, or at the CMS school meeting. I've done all of those things, and guess what? They've ultimately done the interview. I'm much rather, Colin, would sit there. I'd rather sit here,
right,
and just have this conversation,
right, rather than having to force some questioning.
I don't want to have a microphone. I mean, it's not
right.
That's not conversational. I want to just sit here and talk to somebody to really get their side. I mean, I'm so dead set, maybe to a fault, about being fair. Honestly, because it's so important.
I think that's great. I think that's great. And I think more people should know that journalists are doing this each and every day, right? I can't speak to other companies, but I know with Integna, that is a core value of ours. And we really love the things that you are doing. I know it takes a lot of work, because you have not just this story, as you said, multiple projects going on in the background. And I think that in of itself is a skill set that's just not taught. So we appreciate the work. You got to see this story. It's tonight at 6. Nate has done so many other stories that he's filed. Of course, that legislation he was just speaking of is on WCNC.com. You can also find it through the WCNC mobile app. So